All right, welcome back. This is going to be lecture 7. This will cover chapter 6, Latin America and the United States. So we're going to skip 1, we'll skip 2, you can read the history, the Monroe Doctrine and all that kind of stuff. But we'll skip straight to the Cold War, the more sort of contemporary stuff. And I did just want to sort of highlight the Dulles brothers, right, and Guatemala. So the Dulles brothers were famously members of the United States administration, right? Uh, you had John Foster Dulles, who was the United States Secretary of State. And then you had his brother, Allen Dulles, who is the director of the CIA, right? So this is the late 50s and the 60s. Um, and then they owned together a company called the United Fruit Company, right? And it operated in countries like Honduras, Guatemala, Brazil, and others. Um, and they mostly did bananas. And so they had these huge, huge landownings owned by the Dulles brothers, right, in Guatemala. And Guatemala held an election, and a guy named Arbenz is elected president. And he's sort of a leftist president, right, from a completely free and fair democratic election. And so he decides that, according to his election promises, he is going to, as one of his policies, start to redistribute land to the poor. The Dulles brothers freak out, and they had already had a sort of secret propaganda war against Arbenz in the media of Guatemala. But then he won the election, and he started basically implementing his ideas about land reform. And of course, the Dulles brothers and the United Fruit Company own much of the land in Guatemala. And so, of course, they're going to come after them. And so basically, the Dulles brothers help, through the CIA, overthrow Arbenz and instill a dictator, Castillo Armas, to be the dictator and to protect the United Fruit Company's assets. So some pretty shady stuff there, right? We also know about the multiple failed assassination attempts on Fidel Castro in Cuba, with, I mean, literally like cartoonish stuff, like exploding cigars, poison cigars. I mean, there are just a whole lot. A roving mob hit squad in Cuba, all of this weird stuff, all of which failed too. So then you have the assassination of Trujillo in the Dominican Republic. You had the Brazilian coup backed by the United States government in 1964. You had the 1973 military coup on Allende, a Democrat, for Pinochet, a psycho who killed thousands and disappeared many more. Um, and then you had the sort of brutal military regime of the Somoza family in Nicaragua was supported for 40 or more years. Finally, the Sandinistas, this sort of Marxist group, takes over. This Marxist slash peasant slash rural group takes over. They institute democracy. President Jimmy Carter opens relations initially with them, but after Carter leaves office in 1980, Reagan crushes the Sandinistas. He's trading. Oh, man, it gets really shady. So the Iran-Contra scandal. Okay. So we have the hostages in Iran for 444 days. Reagan says he had nothing to do with it, but the day he takes office, the hostages are released when Jimmy Carter leaves office, basically. Um, and then Reagan is secretly shipping weaponry through the CIA and through people like Oliver North to Iran, who are our dire enemies, right? They had just taken over the democratic elected Iranian government. They exiled the Democrats. A religious group took over, the Ayatollahs. So they're supposed to be our enemy, but he's sending them weapons. In exchange, they're sending cash to the not the Sandinistas, the Somozas, the Contras in Nicaragua to fight against the democratically elected Sandinistas it was a complete mess, and it was very messy for the United States and quite embarrassing. So, yeah, crazy stuff if you're interested in reading some real world crazy spy stuff. Okay, the final section here, since the end of the Cold War, Section 4A just points out that we've got a lot of democracy, right? We've talked a lot about that. We should also talk about the drugs, right? In 1971, President Nixon institutes what's called the War on Drugs. In 1973, the DEA is created, the Drug Administration Agency or administration. My uncle was actually a DEA agent for about 25 years, and then he was an ambassador in Europe to Austria for a while. But he's got some really cool stories to tell, hunting down these drug lords in South America. Um, you know, the, I don't know. I would argue myself, and many others argue, that the drug war has been a crippling failure. It's cost billions, maybe trillions of dollars. It has caused the death of thousands, and yet we only seize about 1% of the global drug crop every year. And that's an approximation. It might be even smaller. So, yeah, it's a bit of a mess. It really begins and kicks off in South America with the Ochoa gang and the Medellin cartel in Pablo Escobar. Pablo Escobar with pot, basically, like he learned you could make a lot of money selling pot, but then they're like, well, shit, cocaine's a lot more profitable and dense, right? And so they moved to cocaine, basically. Um, Escobar's a really interesting cat, but they kill him. This leads to the fracturing of the drug market, basically all the way across Central America, Mexico, Jamaica, etc. And then recently, we actually caught the Biden administration caught two high-level Mexican drug lords, and I honestly think that's going to cause more future violence because of again the power vacuum. But yeah, if anybody's interested, Escobar is also a really fascinating character. Like, the just sort of nothing has to do with nothing, but like Colombia, which does not have hippopotamuses, um, right naturally, has a huge hippopotamus problem that's actually killing Colombian citizens because Escobar had his own sort of zoo on his giant property. Pablo Escobar did, and the the hippopotamuses have gotten to the point where they breed pretty rapaciously. And so there's hundreds of hippopotamuses or hippopotami, I don't really know, wandering around the Colombian waters and rivers and countryside, killing animals and trampling crops and stuff. Yeah, it's really weird stuff. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll be up for the very last lecture in Unit 1 here in a minute. Have a great day. Bye.